So I just wanted to mention that when I had first submitted my manuscript for the first Orbs book, Cynthia Black, who is the president of the publishing company who did that, suggested to consider writing it jointly with another author, Dr. Miceal Ledwith, whom at that point in time I had not heard about. So, and he apparently submitted a manuscript on the same subject, but with a different take on it. And Miceal and I got together and found the idea a good one. And our first book, The Old Perfect, was published in 2007, about 5 years ago. It is now available in over 10 different languages, including German and Dutch and Italian and Russian and Japanese and several Slavic languages. We've been friends ever since. And what can I say about you, Miceal? Miceal is a very distinguished person. In 1967, he was ordained as a Roman Catholic priest. He was later called to the Vatican, where he served several years under Cardinal Ratzinger, who is now the Pope. And it is there that Monsignor Dr. Ledwith started his fascinating research into the life of Jesus prior to the time when he took up the mission we all know. In 1977, Professor Ledwith then joined academia, and in 1985 he was appointed president of a renowned British university, the St. Patrick's College. Dr. Ledwith now lives in the state of Oregon. It is exciting to listen to him. He lectures worldwide, just literally all over the world. Whenever I try to call him, he's always somewhere else in a different continent. So much so that it's exceedingly difficult to get a hold of him.
I think I'm going to survive. I think I'm going to survive this introduction.
Good, great. So when Dr. Ledwith, you and I met, he already had over 150,000 photos of orbs in his digital storage. His knowledge, your knowledge, Miceal, in the subject of orbs is unquestionably unsurpassed.
Yes. Yes, we need to mention that looking back at this history that Klaus just mentioned, all I can say, I think the field of unlimited potential made it happen that you got to work together on this subject, because there is so much more deeper meaning, and the orbs actually point toward much more than the phenomena. And in all his work, Miceal has really expressed this in very thought-provokingly and clearly, that they point toward joy and freedom, and also toward our place in the universe, which for each one of us is rather unique. And if you haven't already checked out the films in which Miceal is featured, What the Bleep and Down the Rabbit Hole, you have to do so, and also his thought-provoking DVDs, Deep Perception, and then he's featured in Orb the Veil is Lifting, and his recent DVD, Orbs Clues to a More Exciting Universe. You just have to check them out, and you'll be fascinated for the whole presentation.
So once again, Miceal, it is a great privilege to have you on the program and to pass the proverbial microphone now over to you. So you can show your PowerPoint presentation. And here you go.
Thanks so much indeed, Klaus and Gundi. Can you hear me okay? I seem getting some feedback. Is it okay?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. It's wonderful to be back with both of my dear friends again, Klaus and Gundi. We've been in association a lot more perhaps than Klaus might have suggested, despite my constant movement throughout the world. But I must say, since Klaus and Gundi and I became acquainted, I'm horrified to think how many years it's already been. It's been a most wonderful association. I had been asked by Cindy Black, the president of Beyond Words, after the Prophets Conference, under whose aegis we are operating today in a real sense, with Robin, and unfortunately Cody is no longer with us, But given the topic of today, I'm sure he's looking in on us with a profound interest. But after the Prophets Conference on What the Bleep in Santa Monica, California, Cindy asked me to do a draft of a book on orbs, which I did. And, you know, they work in cooperation with Simon & Schuster, as you probably know. And I was amazed that Simon & Schuster, a major publishing company, would be interested in producing a book on a topic which at that stage was very, very way out. But then along came Klaus and Gundi, and of course Klaus, as you know, is a renowned physicist with his feet firmly planted, unlike the theologians, not in midair, but on the ground. And I think Cindy thought that the risk was somewhat substantially lessened by the fact that Klaus was the partner in the project. So anyway, I think someone said to me just the other day, it's the best book on orbs in terms of being down-to-earth, factual, and scientific that exists in the world today. So I'm not surprised, Klaus, to learn of the number of languages in which it has been translated so far. So I'm really profoundly sorry for all of the mess up this morning. We had a flawless rehearsal with Mike on Friday. Everything went spot on. Late last night, I want to share this with you because I think it's important from another perspective. Late last night, about 11 o'clock, I went to double check everything. I found that my access to the internet was gone totally. I stayed up till an ungodly hour. This morning I tried again. There's no sign of anything. I changed computers. I didn't use Wi-Fi. I went to the plug-in, direct line, still no internet access. Then I tried to phone Mike, telling him that we're having a problem about 8 o'clock 3 hours ago. No telephone lines, nothing. So then I bundled my whole collection, webcam, etc., over to a neighbor's house, asked them if they would mind me, camping for a couple of hours, and that's where I am right now. But I had a problem with this about 2 months ago. I had to call in the local internet provider. They brought up their equipment for analysis. They found that there was a square wave signal coming into my house about every 20 minutes, and it was disabling the internet. Now, this is not the first time that I have had this problem whenever I'm going to speak, because about 2 months ago, I began to speak about the secret societies that try to control the world. And obviously, it has ticked some people off very substantially, because in that treatment, I described the various programming, the programming effects that they're using to program to even enter into our own quantum field and affect us from there, so that we think these thoughts that are being implanted are our own. So despite all of the ultra secure steps that I've taken, I mean, I'm protected. You would not believe by how many antivirus and anti-problem systems here. But despite my best efforts today, obviously that didn't work. So my deepest apologies.
No problem, Michael. We are glad that you're here.
So am I. So am I. Anyway, I want to flip briefly through a large number of slides here, because I think we're talking in a vacuum unless we see something of the rich variety of the phenomenon of orbs. And I have included slides from when I first started with this, which was at the inspiration of my own teacher, Rampa, about 11 years ago. And I have over 300,000 orb images, I think, right now. Anyway, I think the main thing, and I know I share this interest with Gundi and Klaus, we, are perfectly happy that the orb phenomenon is genuine. We have subjected it to the most rigorous of scientific testing. We know there are a huge amount of false orb images out there, ranging from flying insects to dust particles to pollen in the air, through lens flare and 1,000 other phenomena. But having eliminated all of those, we know that the phenomenon is real. So, as all three of us have agreed several years ago, the real implication for this study is, what does it do to affect our basic beliefs? That's why the title up there, if you can see it on your screen, is Orbs. What do we see? Above all, though, what do we learn from this? Because I think, as I will come when I flip through this presentation of pictures, I think that basically all of the fundamental beliefs that we as a people on this earth share have to be fundamentally redefined, from the highest to what God is, down to what we are as human beings, down to what spirit is, down to what matter is, down to where we fit even in the physical universe. And I never fail to remember that as recently as the 16th century, we are the 1600s, we were still embroiled in that controversy from Nicholas Copernicus and Giordano Bruno, who was burned at the stake, basically, for saying there were other planets on which people might worship God according to their lights, down to Galileo 33 years later. Now, I mean, Galileo and Copernicus and Bruno combined would not recognize the vision of the universe we have today, especially in the last 2 or 3 years from NASA's Kevlar spacecraft, and what that has revealed to us of the extent of the galaxy. And the potential, at least, from the preliminary results of Kevlar, are that we're talking about possibly billions of planets in the universe. Colossal. I mean, I'm not talking about the national debt kind of billions. I'm talking about billions far, far in excess of that. And surely one or two of those at least could have fitted Giordano Bruno's specification for a planet on which people might live and worship God according to their lights, even if they were not carbon-based, and even if they did not look like us. So I think, given the fact that as early as the 20th century, now, Klaus, I am not attacking you, obviously, when I say this, but even at the beginning of the 20th century, which was long before your time and mine, the experts, the astrophysicists of the day, still believed that the Milky Way galaxy was the entire universe. Just like they say in the time of Jesus and St. Paul, this solar system was thought to be the entire universe, and people were wondering about questions like what holds up the sky, etc., etc. So we have moved an awfully long way in our understanding of the universe and our modest place in it, even in the last decade, especially in the last 2 or 3 years. And now we realize, to our great humbling, that instead of being the center of it all, as was thought for so long, that we actually are living in the boondocks, on the fringes of a galaxy, which in itself is a rather rural galaxy. In other words, we are not in the Rodeo Drive or the Beverly Hills or the Rue des Champs-Élysées of the universe. We are in the boondocks. So, that is one major humbling, in a sense, that comes to us from the study of orbs in particular, but it's also a great humbling when we realize that not alone may we not be at the center of God's design, which we held on to steadfastly, even after we recognized that geographically we weren't at the center of everything. We were still at the center of God's design. Now we have to realize that there very likely exist, millions of sentient beings, and horror of horrors, the great, great humiliation is that not alone are we not the be-all and the end-all, the center of everything, we may turn out to be a rather primitive group of people in the community of the galaxies. That's a great humiliation for anyone living in the 20th century on this earth to embrace, but I think it is extremely likely that that is the biggest hurdle we've got to overcome. And I think the tool that brought me to that sort of realization and the fundamental reworking of every fundamental category that we have accepted came to me from the study of orbs. As I know, it has also from Gundi and Klaus. So I think our greatest benefit from this study, Klaus and Gundi, has been what do we learn? I mean, we have piled up, thousands upon thousands of images of what we see. That in itself, of course, has brought us enormous wisdom because we begin to realize, as I did, after about 2 years of photographing orbs every night. Of course, I was part of the old paradigm. Night has to do with the otherworldly and the ghostly and the paranormal. So for the first couple of years, my orb photographs were taken at night. But after an hour a night or 2 hours a night, and then analyzing these pictures on my computer, suddenly one day, to my great surprise, I began to see orbs with my naked eye. I didn't need the camera. And the startling thing was that the orbs were, the colored orbs were much more vividly colored than what I could see on the camera itself. So this began to give me a clue that perhaps we're not living in the kind of universe we thought at all. It's actually a storied universe of several levels, and the only difference between them is a change in frequency. And I think the reason why everybody doesn't see orbs is the following. First of all, everybody is seeing orbs. But number two, we know that our brain has to filter out about 90% of the data that comes in through our eyes because the brain can't cope with that amount of information. So it filters out the things that are reckoned not to be of practical use for living, like bringing the children to school, taking them to daycare, paying the mortgage, doing my job, etc. The brain focuses on that. And most assuredly, orbs do not fit into that category. There's no way to make orbs into a commercial enterprise. We can't even tax them, as someone once said to the British Prime Minister about electricity. You'll eventually be able to tax it, Mr. Gladstone. But anyway, we haven't figured a way to tax orbs. But the main interest that we have is that we know if we can convey to our brain, which is a complicated process, as any neuroscientist will tell you, that we are interested in seeing these orb images that are coming through our eyes, the brain will stop filtering them, and then we will begin to see them with our naked eye. So that was my clue, because if we take the traditional version or picture of the universe, which you see in every high school textbook of physics, the electromagnetic spectrum, we're down at the bottom in the physical. Above us is the infrared. Above that is the visible light spectrum. Then you have ultraviolet and so forth. But the mystery to me always used to be, if we are living in the Hertzian plane, the bottom level, my old teacher always tells me, don't worry, you're not going to hell. You're already in it. This is as low as we can go. So if we are here on the Hertzian plane, the basic level of the electromagnetic spectrum, how come we're seeing 2 levels above that, invisible light? So if that is true, and if we accept that all of the levels, say of the 7 levels, I'll come back to this in more detail at the end, if we accept that all of these levels are slightly in the future relative to each other, so that what happens in the infrared realm is slightly in the future of us here on the physical plane, what happens in the light plane, the visible light plane in physics, is even further into the future than we are down here. So essentially, we are seeing 2 levels above where we actually exist in the physical. And that in itself bears a tremendous amount of contemplation, which I've gone into in some articles, which you can look at on my website there, Hamburger Universe, at the bottom of the screen, if you so choose. So there are an enormous number of implications that upset the neat and tidy categories in which we have all learned to see everything we understand and so forth. So if it's okay with you, I will now proceed rapidly to go through a selection of images so that people will, at least that are not familiar with this, will have an idea of the wide range of the kind of orb pictures that exist. And I've included in this presentation orbs from 2001, 2002, right up to the present day to try to give a representative sample. When I was preparing this presentation, Robin Johnson asked me to send her my favorite orb picture, and I sent her one of these that's on the screen right now. It's a vortex, a temporal vortex of the Torsian field. Now, the Russians have done a lot of research on the Torsian field 60 years ago with people like Leonid Kosyrev. And for amateurs like me, not like Klaus, but amateurs like me, I think, and any of your viewers who fall into the same category, I think it's simply sufficient to say that the gravitational field of the Earth pulls us downwards towards the ground, but the Torsian field pulls us at right angles to that. So in other words, if we step into a Torsian vortex, we're going, like what you're looking at in front of you on the screen, you're going to experience some phenomenal changes. In other words, the force of gravity is going to be diminished, and if gravity hangs on time, as some of the, or if time hangs on gravity, I should say, as some of the more recent physicists are saying, well, then the passage of time and the sequence of time is going to be radically affected by it. So when Robin asked me what's my favorite type of orb picture, I think it's these Torsian vortices that I began to capture in about 2002. And I have had hundreds and hundreds of those since then. Anyway, I move forward into the presentation itself, Klaus and Gundi, if that is okay with you.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Okay, thank you. So looking at some of these, oh my Lord, you know what? They won't shift. God almighty. What next? The presentation will not move on my screen. Let me see if there's anything else I can do to accomplish this. I just can't believe this. Cannot believe this.
Mike, are you there? Because I think you might have to pass host privileges to Miceal.
Okay, it's working now. It's working now. These are very weird shapes that have appeared in various places. I just, as I said, giving you a sample of the kind of pictures that do appear. In certain conditions, they're extremely numerous, especially when the air is damp. Because when the air is damp, obviously the electromagnetical conductivity is increased, and orbs tend to be much more plentiful. They have a variety of colors and shapes. Sometimes they fill the whole sky. Sometimes you will find that old friends come to visit you frequently, and you begin to recognize the shapes. Animals can see them really well. Sometimes they're extraordinarily beautiful, sometimes they're white, sometimes they're red, sometimes they're blue, sometimes they're disc-shaped, sometimes they're just pure radiance, sometimes they have holes in them, which I think is due to the fact that they have not fully sunk down in frequency sufficiently so that their whole unity is visible to us. So there's an immense variety of them in all shapes and forms. If you look up to the top right of this screen, for example, in addition to what these phenomena are, which I call plasmoids when I started this, and which orbs expand into when they're quote unquote in good humor, you will see at the top right of this picture a shape that is sort of oriented to the top at about the 1:30 or 2 o'clock position. A person whom I knew very well and was thinking about at that moment that shape, and this person is long dead, that appeared just exactly as we remembered her. All sorts of colors appear, all sorts of shades and hues of every kind. This was taken looking up into a completely black night sky. Sometimes orbs are behind you like they are behind me in this picture. And when they don't have definite edges and circles around the, centered circles around the perimeter, I think these are not living beings, as I've come to conclude from hundreds and hundreds of these. These are actually some form of machine, some form of observational device. But you learn to see those very easily after a while when you practice this. This is also an orb that doesn't have rings around the outside, nor the characteristic bumps and hollows in it. But I think these are elements that are descending from the quantum field down through the intervening levels. Quantum field is the sixth plane of frequency, down into the physical level. And I think when they're in the infrared stage, about to pop into the physical realm, they often look like this. This orb was about, I'd say, 15 feet in diameter, very, very huge, very close up to me. So all sorts of colors and circumstances appear. These are a couple of quantum field swans on my left here, marching towards my car. This photograph was taken in broad daylight. I've often shown it. It was a being about 7 feet tall, whom I saw with my naked eye as I took the picture, but this is what came out on the film. It was at 4:30 in the afternoon against the dark background, which gives the illusion of nighttime. All sorts of strange phenomena of some kinds or other come out, radiances, huge. Now I take most of my pictures in broad daylight against the dark background because I have, how would we say, I have advanced away from the view that orbs are GHOSTS and that they're something else entirely. The colors that the orbs show, I think, give some hint of the frequencies from which they come, even though they may be far removed from the visible light realm and the colors we are accustomed to see. The colors of the other frequencies, I think, reveal the dimensions they come from. In other words, the second dimension, infrared, would be reddish. The third would be whitish, the visible light realm. The fourth, the ultraviolet realm, the orbs would tend to be blue. The realm above that would tend to be gold, and the realm above that, as you see in this slide here, would tend to be pink. So I think they give us, even though they're outside of the visible light spectrum, I think they do tend to give us a clue as to what realm of existence they come from, which should enlarge our vision of reality very remarkably, seeing that we think we are the be-all and the end-all. This is not ET about to phone home up there in the top right. This is an orb that has not yet descended fully into these dimensions. Sometimes you will find that they're filling the whole screen, the whole place around you. Sometimes they have shapes like this rocket. One, whatever this was, it wrecked my first digital camera. It was the last picture it took, and then it wheezed to a halt, even though it was relatively new. There's another type of that orb right up in the top center of the screen. And these are typical infrared orbs, like those red eyes you saw in those famous movies a few years ago. Orbs about 4 or 5 feet wide. That's a car there at the bottom, taken 12 years or 10 years ago. Sometimes these are huge. These are 16, 20 feet across. Sometimes they're small and very beautiful. Sometimes they're striated like this. But the one thing we do want to be aware is lens flare. If you're pointing your camera towards a light source, especially towards the sun or the moon, this is what you're liable to get. It looks like a very beautiful orb picture. It's actually just aberrations due to the optics of the lens of the camera. It's not an orb phenomenon at all. Neither is this one. Neither is this one. Now, I took a lot of our interest has been in communication with orbs, and I took a few of these as a sample of interest here today. This was one night, it's several years ago when this started, though I still do it sometimes. This was the moon in the night sky there above my swing, which is where my house is now built. At that stage, it was just raw land. And then I made a beautiful toast to the moon because it was magnificent that night. And I thought after I took a toast to the moon that I would find a wonderful display of orbs. And I saw nothing, just this. And then I said, is there anybody there? And then 10 seconds later, this is what I got. There's the moon down at the bottom right, and the whole sky filled with orbs. And 10 seconds later, this was the scene again. They had all gone. So, this is a sort of definitive proof, in my opinion, that the orbs come and go as they will. They're not due to dust particles. There's no technology known on Earth that can fill the screen with phenomena like you just saw there, and then clear it away within 10 seconds so that there's nothing. So it's one of the interesting things I found that shows that the orb phenomenon is real. Now, orbs have identifying features that are as unique to them as our fingerprints are to us. For example, you see this typical pattern of concentric circles around the outside and little bumps and inundations indentations, in the center. So if you recognize a particular orb is coming back, say if you do photographic sessions every night, you will begin to recognize, though it's unusual to get as close up as this to orbs, that there are individual orbs coming to visit you periodically every time. And that would probably mean that they have some connection of some form with you, possibly someone who was connected with you in the past that you may not even have known in this life, possibly someone in this life who has passed on, as we say, etc. This is another one of that kind, and this is another. So you can see very definite patterns, which I think is very heartening to people who are setting out on this journey of exploration, because they can identify particular orbs that are showing an interest in them and not, just turning up haphazardly. So they're very unique to each other, as I say, just as realistically as fingerprints are to us. Now, I have noticed that in happy occasions, and people have often asked me, what advice would you give to me if I'm setting out on photographing orbs? Well, I would say, don't be solemn and serious, because the orbs have a choice of where they go. I know Klaus is smiling at this there. I can see him. But the orbs are very choosy about where they associate. If you have doom and gloom and solemnity, especially deep religious solemnity, you probably won't find many orbs, or at least you will not find orbs of the kind you would like to have dinner with. But if they're in good mood, they expand into these cloudish things. This is one from 9 years ago, almost exactly, the first of the great plasmoids, about 50 feet across, which came and went in the blink of an eye. Sometimes they take all sorts of colors and forms that are very interesting. And as I say, it basically happens when there's a spirit of joy around, or when something that they approve of is expressed in their presence. You have all of these wonderful expansions into cloud forms. And sometimes, as I mentioned, there are some slides back, you may have actual images of faces and people you may have known in some of the orbs associated with this phenomenon. Now, communication, we're all interested in that, and I started an experiment with them. I discovered that sometimes the orbs took this hexagonal form when I photographed them. I discovered later, very, very soon later, because I've always been a keen amateur photographer, that this is due to a phenomenon of the mechanism of the camera. That was more so in the days, of course, of film cameras, but there's still, an iris and things that closes off the digital camera. Anyway, I found that when this was happening far more times than it should have, this is the round form of them on the same occasion, this is the hexagonal form, I found when it was happening very frequently that perhaps the orbs were trying to communicate with me visually, even though I couldn't hear them at that time. So I began to test it out. I said, let's take the hexagonal shape that you're looking at there as a positive response, a yes response. Let's take the normal form, the round shape, as a no response. And I did a test of, obvious answers that everyone knew to see if this was happening. I found I had to wait about 30 seconds for a response, but when I did, all of the yes and no answers checked out. So I said to myself, okay, the orbs are trying to communicate with me in this form. So I asked, it was a very tedious process because you have to formulate questions, then you have to wait 30 seconds, then you take a picture, And then you see what the answer was. But in the course of all of that, anyway, to make a long story very short, they talked about the whole future. They talked, for instance, about things that had not yet occurred, about the war in Iraq, about the war in Afghanistan, for example. They said it would initially be very successful, but afterwards it would not turn out to be so successful, and in the long run it would be pretty much a disaster. Anyway, I would say no more about that lest my connection is even further removed here. But anyway, look at this little device up in the top left-hand corner. This came at one point, and that's the shape it took when it came further down. And it seems to me that this is some form of mechanical device. I went up right close to it on many occasions, and when I went really close to it, my hands are out there not to worship it or embrace it, but because there was a shimmering field around this gadget, a shimmering field around it which I wanted to measure for the camera. So I was putting my hands where the edge of the field was. But the next day I began to notice that my face was burned, like if I'd spent a day on the beach or something. And I was wondering if I'd got some extraterrestrial radiation, but nothing fortunately occurred from it. Now, I mentioned the Torsian vortex there briefly earlier on, and what passing into that vortex can do. The vortex obviously in itself is invisible. The fact that the orbs were in it swirling into the center made it visible to me and to the camera. But this is an example of what a Torsian vortex that's not really visible can do. You notice my face there in that picture is somewhat blurred, and that's because I'm in the vortex there to the sides of it. All of these sort of tent-like or peaky structures are characteristic of when this is happening. The orbs are beginning to break up. You see a vortex beginning to form to the left-hand side of myself there. And eventually, you see this. I'm standing perfectly still, as you can see, because my hands and so forth below are not burping, so I don't have a head that jumps up and down on its own. And the picket fence and the surrounding vegetation is all in focus, but my head is in the vortex, and it gives the impression of having 3 heads. Now, I know 2 heads are better than 1, so obviously 3 are better still. But this is an effect of being in a Torsian vortex, that there are distortions of reality in addition to distortions of time and space. So that is something that is of intense significance, obviously, when we talk about the passage of time or passing through various realms of time into the past and into the future. This is sometimes what happens when you don't eat your spinach. You become invisible, or you become translucent or transparent. These photographs have not been touched in any way, shape, or form. And I know there's all sorts of things like double images, double exposures on our pictures. I assure you there are none of these. Anyway, when the Torsian vortices appeared, these were the stages of them, and I stress this for those of you who are taking our pictures. These will not come, in my experience anyway, until you have spent a great deal of time consistently focusing on and photographing orbs. But you will notice the orbs are beginning to break up in this form, like skeletal objects. There's a different form, a different version of it. And these were in broad daylight, as you can see from the blue sky up above. These are drawn from many different photographic sessions, as you can see from the different clothes I'm wearing. Eventually, after a certain stage of decomposition takes place, what you're looking at over my head there starts to form. A sort of funnel effect begins to generate where you have this cobweb-like appearance being assumed by the orbs. It's as if things are being sucked into it. And eventually, the little vortex there is forming over to the right of my head in that picture, and the orbs are losing form entirely. They're looking like white blobs being stretched here and there. And then the vortex begins to develop, spinning to the left. And then finally, the full vortex is formed, as you see there, with the little fuzzy part, which is the core of the vortex, right at the end. Now, this, as I said, is the wormhole, actually, between dimensions. This is the picture I put on the cover of my DVD, Orbs Clues to a More Exciting Universe, because I felt that this is one of the keys to how we access these other dimensions. We're not imprisoned here in the physical. We can access the other dimensions right up along. And I think Klaus and Gundi will agree with me that that is our main interest in what the orbs can self-correct in us, what the orbs can tell us about where our understanding of reality is seriously primitive and deficient. Anyway, that I think sometimes there's a double vortex like that, triple vortex like that, and so forth. What I'm showing you these, like this one, for example, where the vortex is dark, because if you begin to see any of these clues about the orbs beginning to break up and beginning to assume a skeletal form, please spend another half hour or hour until you break through to see some of these wonderful phenomena, because they're extremely rare. Anyway, that is, as I said, if any of you have any questions, I'd be obviously very delighted to answer them. That's my website up there, hamburgeruniverse.com, or of course through the Great Mystery website. If you have any questions, I'll be delighted to try to answer them, at least if I know the answers. This is the mindset. This is the cover of my first DVD. I have 7 DVDs now recorded. This is the front of the cover because I think it displays our mindset. I was drawing about 15 years ago on a board, illustrating the way we think about God. Everyone looks up when they think about God. When they implore God's help, we look up. I always worried what the Australians were doing when they're looking in the opposite direction. So I was drawing this on the board. The earth is a flat place, appropriately in between. The vault of the heavens is above, where God, the angels, and the saints are waiting for our passage through immigration. And God's no longer using the book of life. He's using a laptop like everyone else, and he's watching every move through that telescope. And beneath, we have the vault of the underworld, where we have a convenient, hot, and cold hell, because I noticed that if our religion began in the hot countries of the world, like the Middle East, with Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, our hells tend to be warm. Whereas religions that began in the colder regions, like the Nordic religions, their hell is cold. So I think that is the way we are still thinking, even 400 years after Galileo, and even after 3 years of the Kepler telescope. And this is, in fact, the universe we're living in. And we're on the bottom in the Hertzian plane. So I think it's time for us to grow up a little and to begin to redefine all of the fundamental categories, because this is where we are. This is obviously not the Milky Way galaxy. It'll be several centuries before we get to the stage of being able to take a picture of our galaxy from outside, but it's a galaxy that's roughly the same. And we're not at the center of things. As I said earlier, we're not in the Beverly Hills or Rodeo Drive or the Champs-Élysées of Paris or anywhere else. We are out in the boondocks. And this galaxy itself, even though it's 100,000 light years across, is itself in the boondocks of this universe. So I think we need a very, very large dose of humility to enable us to move forward and to realize that all of the basic assumptions that we as a human race have made about the deeper aspects of life, what comes before birth, what follows death, but above all, what kind of universe we inhabit, how does it work, how does it relate to us, all of these, I think, putting it very modestly, need to be radically redefined. The sooner we do that, the sooner we can grow up and rightfully take our place among the nations of the universe. I'll pause there, Klaus, and hand back to you and Gundi. And if you have any questions or that, I will do my best not to answer them.
Well, this is, let me see if I can get back to okay. This has been very enlightening. Thank you so much for your presentation. And what can we say? This is just terrific.
Yes, I'm very glad that you expanded into how our belief systems have to be changed and hold us back really to move forward toward what's possible. And that's really the topic that interests me most, because it contains the keys to what needs to happen next for all of us. And it's so subtle for most of us. Sometimes we are just not even aware that there are so many belief systems that do hold us back in all our actions and interactions and views of what needs to happen in the world. So if you can expand more, unless there are specific questions here from the field, this would be the topic where...
Yeah, Gundi, I mean, I've greatly admired the work that you and Klaus have done in this field over and beyond orbs, teasing out the implications of them. But, you know, one basic point while people are gathering their thoughts if they wish, if we are living down here looking at the screen on the realm called Hertzian, which is the physical plane, and the infrared, the realm so-called of ghosts, etc., and we have to redefine all of those. What are ghosts? You know, they're just beings that have lost a physical body. But if we exist here, we know, I think, Klaus will correct me on this if needs be, we have to exist also in the realm above it in frequency, and the realm above that, the realm above that, the realm above that, the realm above that, right up to the peak, which is the point zero. We must exist right back to there. And this has enormous implications for our understanding of what God is. Because, you know, if spirit, or whatever we call ourselves up at the realm of point zero, if spirit starts to journey down through these planes, which my own teacher Ramtha has taught extensively on, but I was so pleased to find this corroboration on it. We on the Hertzian plane must also exist on all of these other planes right up to the top. And I remember what Nelson Mandela said on the day of his inauguration. He said, you know, the things that really frighten us and appall us are not our lacks and our weaknesses and our deficiencies. The thing that really frightens us is the power we actually have. Later, I found that he was quoting Marianne Williamson without acknowledgement, so we have to apologize to Marianne. But I think that taking Nelson Mandela made it known more widely than Marianne could have. I think that is the basic fact. And that the unfortunate thing then is that the real difficulty we have in embracing is the enormous ability we have if we can forge a link to these other dimensions which are in us. They're not out there, up there. They're in us. I often think, you know, it's like I hang a dress or I hang an overcoat in a closet. You know, the bottom of the dress or the overcoat cannot hang there unless all of the levels right up to the rail on which the coat hanger goes is in place. So it's like that. If you let point zero be the rail on which it all hangs, all 7 levels can only exist if they're hanging off that one rail. So the Hertzian plane at the bottom couldn't exist without the infrared, visible light, ultraviolet, blue, etc. So that means that instead of a neatly organized universe divided conveniently into spiritual and physical, actually we are all composed of these elements, and they're all based on a false conception that somehow they're spiritual up at the high end of existence and physical down at the low end. Whereas in fact there is only one continuum, which is divided by frequency. So all our understandings of God and our spirit and the soul are not challenged by this. They are, in my opinion, deeply enhanced. But we have to, it's like looking through a kaleidoscope. You twist the kaleidoscope and you see an entirely different arrangement of the same materials. You twist it again, you see another arrangement. I think we cannot, the religious ways of understanding God and the soul and existence prior to and after death cannot be improved. They have to be revisited, like the kaleidoscope. The old paradigm won't work. We need a new paradigm entirely to look on reality. And I think, at least for me, and if I may be so bold, I think from what Gundi and Klaus have written and spoken about, I think it has done the same for them.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And you expressed it so beautifully, Miceal. It's very empowering, humbling, and at the same time incredibly hopeful, because we each can have an important role to play in this whole scheme of things if we just humbly open up and let it be and become a voice.
Yes, I firmly believe that myself, yes. And there have been, I don't want to hog this because I want to let other people come in and talk, whatever you wish, especially as we started late. But at the moment, since I think last September, a good colleague of mine, Cristian Mureșanu in Romania, has been serializing my 5 DVDs on Romanian television, which he has laboriously subtitled himself. But he's doing the Jesus one. We thought this would be the last one because obviously it's the most controversial one. But he said so far none of the Holy Fathers of the Church have come to visit him in the night. But that was as of yesterday. So I said, count every hour that passes as a gain.
How cool.
That is really
That's really fabulous.
But it is the point that you're making is just very, very important, because the belief system is for really, I don't know, almost all of us. I would say all of us, but maybe you're the exception. The most powerful thing there is in our lives, and that is what needs to be changed. And shaken up, and that's probably what the orbs are just trying to communicate to us.
Yes.
It is. If we manage to re-examine our belief system, we've done something. If I think about how I think about, let's say, the topic of spiritual healing,
right?
My mind tells me, oh yes, of course, there is something like spiritual healing. Excuse me, but deep inside, it's very different. Deep inside, there are still these doubts that come up in all of us. Is it? I can't see it. I've been taught. That whatever you can't see can't be. Deep inside our own being, we are archaic in our belief. That needs to be changed. And I believe that the orbs are actually reminding us of this change there. You said it so beautifully, that we are much, much more than just what we perceive on the Hertzian plane.
Right.
That is just a minor part of it. And if we don't manage, if we don't succeed in seeing beyond that, we are really missing out.
Right. And Klaus, if I might interject, I hope I'm not interrupting you, but if I might interject, if you look at this, I presume you can see what's on the screen here. And the point I made, that we're here on the Hertzian plane, call it that, but we're actually seeing in the visible light spectrum, which is 2 levels up. So, I mean, this is an enormous, I've said this to so many audiences, and they don't seem to realize this is an enormous impact, because we're already, further up this pyramid than we thought. we're already seeing every day. And another thing which I had written an article on recently is, if we, you, everyone, is seeing invisible light, we're also seeing slightly in the future, because each of these dimensions is slightly in the future relative to the lower one. So I would like to invert this pyramid and have the point at the bottom and the infinite unknown at the top, because each of these dimensions is dramatically greater than the one lower in frequency. But that being said, if we realize that we're already seeing, a couple of levels up, then obviously it should be child's play to see into the infrared or even the ultraviolet, or even to interact with them. I think we are probably at a very, very low point in human evolution, unfortunately, despite all our self-satisfaction with iPads and all those other wonderful inventions which I love. But we're still at a very primitive stage. And, there's so much talk about extraterrestrials these days, and the most advanced of them have reached the stage of total non-aggression. And if say an enemy were to confront them and threaten to wipe them out, would they defend themselves even though they have superb weapons and technology? No, they would not. But the opposite side of that, the flip side of that coin, of course, is that we know from the quantum physics that we are attracting or magnetizing our own reality to us. And if we have purified ourselves, as we might call it, spiritually, so that all of the teachings of Jesus, which of course I realized years ago were not teachings about morality at all, the teachings of Jesus, I began to realize years ago, had much more to do with physics and the manipulation of the quantum field in its manifestation than they had to do with religion, so to speak. But once we realize that we're attracting our own our reality, our own experiences like a magnet, then all the teachings of Jesus when he said, don't do this, don't return hatred for hatred, don't return evil for evil, love one another. These were not, I'll be saying this afternoon in an 8-hour session I have coming up, but these were not, Miss Manners advice about how to be a nice person, how to be invited to the right parties. These were not bits of advice to make us nice people. They were actually bits of advice given to keep people, as his audience was, who didn't understand the quantum field, which he called the kingdom of heaven. They were pieces of advice to keep people on the right track who didn't quite yet understand the mechanism. So once we begin to understand that, then we go back to our friends, the very advanced extraterrestrials, who, confronted by an aggressor, would not choose to defend themselves by attacking. They wouldn't. They would rather die. But the flip side of that coin, as I mentioned earlier, is that they have also cleaned out from their reality and their consciousness anything such as negative thoughts of jealousy, hatred, anger, etc., aggression and guilt and fear and lack. They've totally removed those from their reality, which is what we were all here to do, which is actually what Jesus himself came to teach here, not the rubbish that we're being fed as a version of what he was supposed to have done. In other words, dying on the cross for our sins. What does that say about God? What does that say about us? What's that say about a God who would ask such a thing of his innocent only son? I mean, this whole thing is turned the message of Jesus entirely on its head. But anyway, coming back to those alien races who would rather perish than assault an enemy, the flip side is that such a situation would never arise because they have so cleaned out of their consciousness anything that would magnetize such a reality that that kind of confrontation would never come. That's the flip side of it. That is what we were meant to do. That is what Jesus came to teach us, and Mary Magdalene. And that is what we're not getting. And the sooner we get it and forget, oh my Lord, look at all these conflicting religions on the face of the earth. I spoke at the Parliament for a conference of world religions in Cape Town about 10 years ago, and to my great horror, and I'm not easily horrified in matters of religion, I discovered that there are now over 20,000 congregations, churches, and denominations and gatherings that claim to be Christian. Some of them claiming to be the only true version of it. I give up, as Jesus has given up by now, I'm sure.
Well, thank you for expanding so much on this. And I was just thinking while you were talking that this picture that you have here really needs to be expanded, because there is, for the physicists, for us physicists, all the way from the bottom, through gamma rays is very well known. In a way, it's almost visible for us.
Right.
The infinite unknown is so huge compared to that. I'm almost picturing another triangle that starts at the top of this one here, which totally deals with the unknown and goes into that, and that's what's being, in a way, it has to do with the torsion field. It has to do with what is being shown to us, maybe through these orbs or through other phenomena. But if you picture another triangle sitting on top, inversed, you almost have the hourglass.
Right.
It's an interesting symbolism.
Excellent point.
So what you're saying is terrific. I wonder if maybe we should open up to questions from people and maybe have you respond to those. That would be fantastic.
You're in charge. Whatever you wish, I'd be very delighted to do that.
Yes, that sounds great. We actually have a lot of questions too. So.
Great.
You have questions? You mean people have questions?
Yeah. So many.
Maybe
Okay.
you can take it. You can take the ball from there.
All right, thank you, Klaus. Thanks, Gundi.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. You're still on. You're still on, Miceal.
Oh, yes, very much so. Despite my previous record this morning, I am still here. Sometimes when people say to me, how are you doing? I say, I'm alive and well, contrary to all rumors. So contrary to all rumors and expectations, I am still on.
All right, great. So our first question is from Julia McKenzie, who doesn't have a mic, so I'm going to ask for her.
Okay.
And she writes, hello, I'm wondering if you've ever interviewed any yogis about orbs. The reason why I ask is because my yogi has stated an interesting thing when my daughter and I were in India. It was something about there being 2 types of orbs. Your comments on all this are much appreciated.
Now, did she mention perhaps, Julie, what the 2 types were?
Julia, if you want to shoot me a private message or just put it out there.
Well, while she's doing that, I have not interviewed any yogis about orbs. But, as I'm sure Klaus and Gundi also have, after we published the book and later when I published the DVD, which wasn't to fill vacancies up in the book, it was dealing with somewhat different areas. Of course, we've all got an enormous number of questions of various kinds from people. So even someone was very kind one time to send me a collection, an amazing collection of orb pictures that taken everywhere all over the world. From the Far East up into Himalayas and Tibet to Australia, Tasmania, South America, up into Alaska, up into the north of Greenland. I mean, the orbs are everywhere. But I don't know, I have no idea what a particular yogi, and I suppose when you ask what is a yogi, it's like asking what is the price of a car or what's the length of a piece of string. It depends on what particular interest you have. I'm always taken when Jesus and his twin brother Thomas went to the east long ago, 2,000 years ago. They spent Jesus spent 6 years with the yogis down in the cities of India, and then after another 6 years went up into the hills, into Nepal and Tibet. But all they found in the lower regions were pompous gurus who wanted to be worshipped and served and taken care of, and they never taught anything of any insight into the nature of reality. So, I mean, when you say yogis, I mean, I know there are magnificent beings in India and many other places who are yogis, but again, it's like, what's the length of a piece of string? I mean, I don't know. Unfortunately, I don't know any advanced yogis, so I haven't had a chance to interview them. The yogis that perhaps I am in contact with, I suspect don't have anything very profound to add to what Gundi and Klaus and I have already done. And I really hate, if I can be so strong as that, because I don't hate anyone, I haven't the energy, is I hate people who say that a certain color of orb is the Archangel Michael and another color of orb, is the Archangel Gabriel or Raphael or Panuel. There's no justification for saying that. The orbs are beings of these other dimensions. They're as down to earth as you and I are. Let's not replace the old enslavements with a new set of enslavements. The human race has been kept in bondage long enough with mysteries and prohibitions and punishments and threats and basically we are not here to obey a certain set of rules set down by God on the basis of which we get a reward after death. That is absolutely why we are not here, and it's absolutely not the teachings of Jesus Christ, whom I hold in the greatest, profoundest regard.
Yes.
Oh, actually, Julia just wrote to me, and she wrote, I do remember him saying that there was one kind that was like trying to hitch a ride to evolve into a higher state of consciousness.
Well, I do know myself. I don't know. I really can't add anything substantial to that second part of the question. But I do know myself, of course, that there are beings in existence that are not helpful to our evolution. But basically, one thing that I have done, I have photographed orbs, or I know, let's not say orbs. I have photographed beings outside places where personal responsibility is diminished. Like in places where people are taking drugs, their personal responsibility is diminished. Where people are drinking alcohol to excess, personal responsibility tends to be diminished. And I invite you yourself to take your camera to such places outside bars and discos. I am not condemning bars and discos. Don't send me emails about whether I'm condemning bars and discos. I am not. I'm simply saying that if you take your camera and aim them up outside a bar or a disco or a party where people are taking drugs, you will see blobs of some kind of material hanging off the electric wires and hanging off the beams, etc. These are earthbound spirits, which are beings who were so materialistic in this life that they never gave any credence to something beyond it. In other words, looking at the triangle here in front of us, they never gave any thought to the infrared visible light and so on upwards, not to speak of Klaus's pyramid on top of that, inverted. So they're earthbound. They're trying to live off people who are still in their physical bodies and try to live through them. They're basically parasites of a spiritual kind. And some of them can be quite a drain. And there's a way to deal with them. I mean, you don't have to talk about, casting them out. Most of what they need is help, direction, information, because they don't know what to do once they lose their physical body. They're cast adrift without a compass in the middle of the ocean. They don't know where to go. So, but there are a lot of those beings who try to live off people when their responsibility is down, and they basically function like a parasite would, drawing our energy and our life force. A lot of people who are, totally drained of energy and all that, it could be due to that. Sometimes, of course, it's nothing whatsoever to do with it. Everyone says, oh, I need an exorcism, I need this. No, you don't. You just need to get with it.
Thank you.
I hope it's of some help.
Yeah, Klaus, is there anything you wanted to add, or should I connect the next question?
I think more questions would be good here.
Okay, great. The next person has a mic. This is Penny Joseph. Penny, are you there?
Hello, can you hear me?
Hi,
Yeah.
Penny.
Hi.
Where are you calling from, Penny?
We're in Shoreham by Sea in Sussex, UK.
Oh, wonderful. Oh, it must be nice. You're into the night now. I'm in the Pacific Northwest.
Oh, right, yeah. We're into the night.
You're 8:30 there in Sussex.
That's right, yeah.
Go ahead, Penny.
Miceal, we'd like to know, did you have any sensation when you were in the vortex in those photographs that we saw?
Oh, yes. I mean, I like to make a joke of very serious things because there's sometimes there's much more than we can bear. So I think, even in English literature, speaking of your homeland, some of the greatest writers always poked fun at something that was too solemn and too mysterious to give them a chance to absorb it. So someone said to me one time, in connection with those vortex pictures which I showed you, did you go through the fuzzy thing at the end of the vortex? And I said, no, I didn't. And they said, why? And I said, there was a picket fence in the way. So that, number one, diffused the question and the self-importance of it and got us on to something else. But yes, there is a very perceptible shift in time, I would put it that way. You notice I showed you some of these vortices at night and the others, the ones I showed you, were in the day, and you saw the distortion, physical distortion, say, of my face and that one I showed you. But there is a noticeable lapse in time. I never went through the fuzzy thing at the end, not just because of the picket fence, but because I felt that the distortion in time would be much more serious than just going through the edges. Now, the vortex was from the camera, which was on a tripod, to the fuzzy core of the vortex was probably about 15, maybe 18 feet, and it extended back behind the camera roughly the same distance. So this is a quite huge phenomenon. It's about close to 30 or 40 feet long, and it's spinning. And it's about maybe, say, where the camera was, it's about 10 or 12 feet high. But going out through the edges of that, I did notice distortions, particularly in time. Now, obviously, you're not conscious of distortions in your physical frame, and I had no one else there to observe it. I was doing all this on my own in the middle of the night, which someone who was a friend of mine, when they saw these pictures, said, are you really careful about what you're doing? Do you know what you're getting into? And I said, quite sincerely, I don't know what I'm getting into, but I don't know any other way to go. So, yes, there is a change. That's why I'm beginning to think, someone asked me one time, Penny, I said to them, I can't understand time. It's the one thing I know, above the visible light realm or the ultraviolet here in this triangle in front of us, above that, we haven't really a clue of what we're talking about because it's so removed from our experience. So we have to use imagery, similes, metaphors, etc. But, with all that being said, I could not make sense of time. And someone said to me, oh, read this book and that book and that book. And I said, I've read all those before you were born. But I'm talking about having read them. I still can't make sense of time. And then when I had this experience with the vortices and the changes that there were, and in fact, I might point out to you, you're the first person I have ever answered this question to. I've been asked this question a multitude of times. I have never answered it till now because I don't want people getting focused on this instead of doing their own stuff. But when I realized the distortions that were happening with the vortexes, I began to suspect that there was a relationship between gravity and time, because the Torsian vortex does definitely reduce the effects of gravity. It's not a weight loss program. It just reduces the effects of gravity. It doesn't make you lighter. But in doing that, it also affects the passage of time. So to use a homely expression, which is all we can do about fundamentals, I think, that's why I love the astronomers. They are very simple. Instead of, the terms in botany, which are 500 letters long in obscure, vulgarized Latin, the astronomers, took nice, simple phrases like the Big Bang. That's it. Bang is done. Simple. So likewise, in terms of the tradition of the astronomers, talking about the phenomenon of the Torsian vortex, I began to see that time hangs on gravity, and that when gravity is interfered with, that the passage of time is altered, definitely. I didn't go through the fuzzy part ever because I didn't want to be left in the 15th century with only credit cards in my pocket.
Hmm. Hmm.
But these are physical phenomena. There were no incantations, no sacrificing of chickens, nothing to produce these effects. These are physical phenomena. I mean, I had all of these pictures to prove it. Someone said to me once, I think it was the time of the Prophets Conference, Robin will remember that, Robin Johnson, I mean. Someone said to me in Santa Monica, these were photoshopped. I said, I'm flattered. I'm flattered to think I have that ability. Well, if they are photoshopped, I said, which I know nothing about, why don't you just produce them yourself? And needless to say, they haven't been produced yet.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, do we have any other questions?
Yeah, we have a lot more actually.
Well, thank you, Penny. Thank you so much. Enjoy the evening in Sussex.
Okay, our next question is from Dennis Farley, who doesn't have a mic, and he writes, Hi, Miceal, Klaus, and Gundi. Some believe that orbs may be spirits of departed humans. What do you think and why?
I say they are. Some of them are, undoubtedly, spirits of departed humans. But if you look at the triad here in the diagram again, there are beings who have come from point zero. Let's call them spirits, for want of a better word. I hate that word. But let's call them spirits for now. Some of them have come right down here into this realm of polarity, which begins at visible light. Beyond visible light, we have no polarity. That's why I think it is so important for us to remove polarity from our lives, about everything we believe, about everything we understand, about everything we remember. Because when we die and lose the physical body, and we go up through that realm, we are going to lose everything that's polarized. That's why most of us come back with no memories or almost none, because they've all been polarized. There's all about competition. It's all about lack. It's all about jealousy, fear, hatred, envy, all these things that Jesus said avoid like the plague because they're to your detriment. So yes, the braver spirits, to call them that, have come right down here into polarity, that final three realms, as my teacher Ramtha has taught it, and which makes so much sense to me. They have come down. But the beings that have come down here are not the totality of beings that exist. There are beings in these four upper levels that have never come down here at all. Whereas the ones that have come down here have bought into the system, and usually, if they haven't resolved everything fully, which would be a word we would apply ascension to, which has nothing to do with going up in a vertical direction from the earth, surrounded by smoke and light and all that garbage. It's something much more profound and deep than that. If we have not resolved all our issues, which is ascension, which focuses a perfect conductor between point zero and the physical plane, so that we walk on this earth as God man, God woman realized. If we haven't done that, we'll be drawn back here to resolve it. And we're usually drawn back to the issues we haven't addressed, to the issues we haven't solved. So the circumstances in which we are reborn reflect the issues we need to address to be free. Usually we see it as an imposition, as highly unfair. Why did God do this to me? We've missed the boat. Before you know it, you're going to be back to the diapers again. Now, the U.S. Army has recently, in the last 3 or 4 weeks, has developed a Kevlar diaper for use in Afghanistan and Iraq to protect the private areas of the military from significant damage from IEDs. So don't worry about going back to the diapers. If you can get your hands on just one of these Kevlar units, it'll probably see you through several lifetimes. That is a joke. I am just pricking the bubble of becoming too serious here. So yes, most of the orbs we see, for the simple fact that they are making themselves known, taking that trouble, so to speak, are the beings who have previously incarnated and who may well incarnate again. But remember, the less baggage we carry when we go through that barrier after death, the more favorable our next incarnation will be. Now, I know the religions of the West have a bizarre array of beliefs about what happens after death. But, you know, they have nothing at all to say about what precedes life. And when you begin to realize the law of magnetism that works in the universe, and therefore that my next incarnation is going to be determined in its circumstances largely by the issues I didn't resolve in the previous one, well, then I would have to say that having nothing to say about what precedes birth is not just a minor oversight. It's a colossal omission.
Thank you. Klaus, did you have anything you wanted to add?
How can I add something to that? This is, I think what I'd rather do is, how are we doing on time?
We do have a lot of questions, I have to say.
Yeah,
we want to kind of get through them.
Let's go on to some other questions.
Okay, so this is actually a little bit of a follow-up before I introduce the next question. Dennis Farley, who asked the last one, was just wondering, A, if since yes, the answer was yes, if people should do something to guard against like evil orbs or spirits when inviting them to visit.
Well, I think it's a very stupid thing to be inviting negative entities into our lives. It's equally stupid to feel that we're defenseless against them. No negative entity has any power that's superior to ours. So if we lead a normal life and take a sane attitude to reality, we have nothing to fear from negative entities. They will find us a poisonous source of nourishment. But you know, one of the biggest limitations that we have here is fear. Fear. And if we fear something, we are drawing it to us like a magnet. So, you know, it's like people trying to heal disease and illness. You never focus on that. And I have it on the screen in front of me. In the past, we thought that demons were the causes of disease. Now we've replaced the belief in demons of disease with viruses, germs, and bacteria, for example. In other words, the world of medicine has replaced the world of superstition. And, you know, it's not so long ago since physicists thought that the heavenly bodies were pushed around by angels. Now we've replaced them with Newton and Kepler's laws of motion. Astronomy has replaced astrology. Alchemy has turned into chemistry. So this is just the stage we're now at. We need to take the next step with regard to fundamental, what we call spiritual beliefs. We need to take the step from meteorology into meteorology from gods like Zeus and Poseidon. If someone came on CNN, for example, the time of Hurricane Katrina, and said that Poseidon, the god of the sea, had descended upon New Orleans, or that Zeus had sent a thunderbolt down and killed somebody, I don't know what we would think of them. You know, but nobody comes on CNN to give a weather forecast in terms of Zeus and Poseidon. But that is precisely what we are doing still in the religious realms. We are interpreting reality in terms of phenomena that are not real and that don't exist and never existed. We've nothing to fear from basic demons unless we've invited them into our realm. And if so, we need help like everyone else, but basically it's not something to which we're all prey. They're not more powerful than we are. They are very real, and they can be a major problem. And if you have such a one, you should address it and get help. But, we're always inclined to say, oh, I need an exorcism because I can't do this or I can't do that. As I said earlier in the program, no, you don't need an exorcism. You just need to get with it and to clean out all the garbage that's in your consciousness, like all of us need to do.
Thank you. Okay, so our next question is actually someone who has a mic and camera. Jane, are you there?
I'm up for my question, so I'm going to put you on
Jane.
hold. Hi.
Jane.
Hello, Miceal.
How are you, Jane?
I'm fine. I'm so excited to be here and be talking with you. I have many friends that are in Washington, around Yelm. They go to the school, so they were so excited that you were presenting this today. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, it's been a wonderful, wonderful force in my life, I must say.
Yes, and one day I hope to also be there and enjoy that. And
you couldn't do better.
Thank you. That's a good affirmation for me. My question is, does our ability to see orbs, does it relate to our own individual level of consciousness or openness to a new viewing of our own personal reality, or do the orbs appear to us to help us in that part of our journey?
I don't think it's anything to do with spirituality, which is a word I hate, because it's so misleading about reality. As I said, there's only one continuum from the Hertzian plane up to point zero. It's divided by frequency. The bottom is not physical and the top is not spiritual. So does the ability to see orbs have anything to do with my special standing in the sight of God, to use an old phrase? Nothing at all. It has all to do with somehow communicating to my brain to stop censoring out the orb images, which are part of the 90% of the information which the brain already is censoring out of what comes through my eyes. So basically, we're looking for a tool that will communicate to my brain, and you can't do this by saying, dear brain, I want you to stop censoring those orb images. You might as well go out and have a cocktail. It'll accomplish just as much. You've got to communicate through the ways that are real to your brain how to do this. And I have found, I'm not saying obviously that's the only way, it's certainly I'm sure not, but the way I found it worked is when I spent, say, about 2 years every night photographing orbs, for an hour or maybe 2 hours, which is easy to do now with the digital photography. It would be absolutely prohibitive in the old days. But eventually, after that focus on orbs, the brain, I think, gets the message that this guy wants to see these things, so the brain will stop filtering them out. It's as simple as that. It's to do with interest and focus. It has nothing to do with your higher level of frequency or anything else. Nothing.
Thank you.
The dreadful silence after that answer.
Sorry, I was a little slow on the uptake.
No. I was wondering if Jane was happy with it.
Oh, I had to, we can only have one person at a time, so I set up the next person.
Okay, it reminds me of the talking scales. Have you heard of the talking scales, Caitlin? There was a very large 300-pound man stood up on the talking scales and put in his quarter, and the scale said, 1 at a time, please.
Okay. One at a time.
One at a time.
One at a time. That's nice. Yeah.
So we have the next person who also has a mic and camera. Virginia, are you there? Let me unmute you. Hi, Virginia.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah. Do you have a camera too?
Yes, I do. Can you see me or no?
If you click on the camera icon, it's the first icon to the right of your name under the panelist box. That should send your video.
It says we can't connect to your webcam. The webcam is installed properly, or are you using another application?
Okay, well, I'm glad you can, you have a mic.
I'm very familiar with that problem, Virginia, myself this morning.
Well, it's an absolute pleasure and honor to be able to speak with you, Miceal, and also Klaus and Gundi. My question for you, Miceal, is you have done a phenomenal job of bringing educating and bringing forward the information from the orb pictures and the orb research that you've done. And I greatly appreciate that, as do all of us. I would like to know if you've set forth on the path of trying to videotape orbs. I happen to be able to move from photographs to videotaping, and I have actually been able to talk to an orb and have it come towards me on camera. And I've asked one to jump into my hand. It's jumped into my hand. It's absolutely fascinating, and I would like to know if you've moved forward with this at all, and if not, I could certainly tell you how, because you are so connected and so able to take these beautiful pictures that being able to see you on video with these orbs could really be a phenomenal experience for all of us.
Yes, I have. I've used, there's two kinds of camera that are usually used for security. There's one that's totally dark, you don't see anything, and there's one that you see a slight taste of redness in. The other one, the one with the slight taste of red, is perfectly adequate for orb videoing. But I'm so encouraged to hear what you've managed to do and that the orbs respond, which they do so well. But what I would suggest as a help in the book which Klaus and I wrote, I pointed out there at one point that I think orbs are seen not by reflected light, like when a camera flash goes off, the light hits say a tree or a person, the light from the flash hits the person, whatever the object is, comes back and is recorded on the photographic plate. The light that hits an orb doesn't come back reflected from the orb, I suggest in that book. I think rather what happens is that the photons from the flash hit the orb, they turn into electrons, and as they say in physics, they spin the electrons in the orb up to a higher shelf. And then once the stimulus of the flash stops, which is only 1,000th of a second or so, then the orb begins to shrink back to its original size and remains slightly larger than it was originally. Now, this is obviously very, very crude imagery to get an impression of what it is. It's like a balloon being inflated and deflated. When the orb deflates, the extra electrons that came in from the flash are spit out again, and they become photons and travel back to the lens of the camera. So I think a lot of the phenomenon we see about cropped images of orbs, etc., are due to the fact that the light from the orb comes back, a very, very tiny time after the reflected light. Orbs are not seen by reflected light. They're seen by this expulsion of light that comes a tiny fraction of time after reflected light. So what I'm saying in all of this rather long, meandering explanation is, if you're doing orb videos and you can get something like a strobe, which will emit pulses of light, you will find that your orb videos are enormously enhanced.
Miceal, are you there still?
I am. Yes, Virginia.
I just would like everybody to know, I moved from infrared camera to the plain iPhone, and if you turn your iPhone on and you turn the LED light on your camera on, you will notice I'm able to also see orbs, and I could watch it start to come into view, and as I called it and it came closer, I noticed that it changed from about the size of a quarter and white. It expanded into a blue orb, maybe 3 inches in diameter, as it came closer to the LED light of the camera. And the LED light gives a blue cast to it. So I kind of wonder, when we take orb photos, if maybe some of the orbs are not becoming colored from something in the flash of our camera also? Because I did notice this on video.
Well, I don't know. I mean, if it were just that, I think it would be hard to explain, in the one photographic session why you have such a variety of colors, even in this single shot. But I know I have not done that with an iPhone, but I know that, for example, the regular digital camera range that we have at the moment are sensitive to high infrared, not to middle or low, and to a tiny spectrum of ultraviolet, which is above the visible light. So that means they're able to access realms, that are above and below the visible light spectrum. However, as I was emphasizing in the earlier section of this interview, we have two barriers to seeing orbs. One, obviously, is that some orbs are not in ultraviolet and they're not in infrared, they're in higher frequencies than that. That's number one, and your camera can only go that far. Now, I know the iPhone camera is very sensitive to that. I've seen that. But what I'm saying is that the second problem with seeing them with your naked eye has nothing to do with frequency, because we are, with our naked eye, able to see beyond ultraviolet and higher up in frequencies. Then we have to deal with the second problem, which is that the brain filters them out. So those are the two issues we have to. But I'm really, really delighted to hear.
There's also another metaphor. The variety of expressions coming to us from that which is beyond is just so immense that we cannot possibly really understand and grasp all of it. And so we may be talking about just simply a different mechanism that is expressed to us in such a way that you can see that, or that we can see that. So there is, just as in our reality, there are tremendous varieties of living beings. There is a huge variety of expression in this other reality, beyond our reality. Well, Miceal, how do you think of that?
Oh yes, I totally agree. I mean, that's the implication of everything I've been saying. That we have rather painfully got away from the belief that we're not at the center of the physical universe. But that's just the beginning of the problem, because there are vaster regions of existence that are above and greater than the physical universe. And when we begin to realize all of that, then I suppose in a sense we'll begin to see that the problem of whether extraterrestrials exist pales into insignificance in comparison to the issues about whether interdimensional beings exist. And what relationship do they have to you and me? And especially when we realize that all of us are actually interdimensional beings who have these 6 levels, just to use that simple diagram, who have, in terms of that diagram, 6 levels above the ones we know. And all of what we are so graciously pleased to call our spiritual evolution, or our miraculous abilities to heal, etc., only comes about when we access these other quote-unquote bodies of us that reside in realms above, because there are elements of that triad that we can access to produce healing. And it will trickle down slowly from that realm when we access it into the physical plane. So all of the stuff, all of the things that Jesus spoke about so wonderfully when he said, all the wonders that I did, you will do, and you will do greater, is all about accessing these realms of ourselves, which are inside. And that was his teaching. He did not come here to suffer and die for our sins. What a ridiculous idea.
Yeah, that sums it up beautifully, and it comes to mind for all the questions that couldn't be answered in the program. Some of your listeners might want to tune into Miceal's website, Embryo Universe, and expand on some of the wonderful material he has available there, which might answer your questions. And then, of course, there are more sessions coming up. Klaus?
Yeah, so at first, Miceal, thank you very, very much for this most enlightening presentation. It was really, really enormous. And to all of those of you who had questions, thank you for the conversation, for the questions, for listening.
And for the team to make it possible, for us who don't understand all these details. Thank you, thank you.
Yeah. In 2 weeks from today, we have Professor William Tiller here. He is another phenomenal person, very highly esteemed scientist, and he will have a perspective that is enlightening again. It will be enlightening to all of us. So let me not say much more of it. And then on May 27th, we will have Dr. Norm Shealy. He is, again, a very well-known person in his own right, a medical doctor and a scientist who has combined his intellectual understanding of medicine with his intuitive understanding of what is beyond that which we can see, which we can sense with our senses. So with that, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Miceal, and we'll see you again in 2 weeks.
Thank you, Klaus and Gundi, and thank you, everyone, for listening in, especially to Robin Johnson.